Welcome to Interabang Chats. Today we are so happy to have with us Amy Poeppel, who will be talking about her latest novel, Musical Chairs, which releases next Tuesday. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We're delighted to have you. Tell us where you're coming from today. It looks very green out there.
Yes, it's very green. And actually, if the timing had worked out, you would be seeing bears walk by. I've got an amazing video of a big mama bear and her three cubs, and they went right past this window behind me. I'm in Litchfield County, Connecticut, which happens to be the setting of the book. It's one of many ways that my life has been imitating art lately. Because I don't normally spend this much time here, but just because of the situation, I got out of New York and I've been here for several months at my house in Connecticut.
Wow, seeing bears walk right by your window, that's doesn't happen in Dallas.
No, and they're actually, these are nice bears. I know that sounds ridiculous for me to say that, but these bears they're not aggressive. That doesn't mean you should go try to befriend them. They're huge. But to see the mom with the three cubs was just amazing. If you look at my Facebook page, you can see the video that I posted and you'll recognize this door behind me. But they're very sweet. They're very shy. They run when they hear sound. But you don't want to come between the mom and her cubs.
No, that wouldn't be a good idea. Is three cubs more than normal?
I think that's more than normal. I've seen her, I don't know if it's the same bear, but there have been bears here before that have brought two. I've never seen a mom bring three before. And they climb trees. They are so fat and adorable. And they just run around and play. And she gets sort of fed up with them sometimes and kind of hurries them along. But they're very playful and they're just really cute. And it's
Wow,
just such a change from New York for me to come out here. And
it's like you're in the middle of National Geographic or something.
we have bobcats, we have wild turkeys, we have hedgehogs, deer, of course. It's great. I love it here.
But you grew up in Dallas, right?
Yes, I grew up, I was born in Dallas and I lived there all the way through, almost all the way through high school. And about halfway through high school, I left, believe it or not, to go to a boarding school in Connecticut, which is exactly where I am. And somehow, years later, and I mean 30 years after graduating, when my husband and I were moving to New York, and we thought we have three sons, and they kind of needed a little bit of space to run around. So we started looking at houses, and we ended up finding a house of all places right in Kent, where I had spent 2 years of boarding school life. So I am back in this town. Didn't think that was going to happen, but I do have to say I love Dallas. I go there all the time. My family is still there. But I do remember arriving in Litchfield County at 17 years old, and that first fall that I was there, and the leaves changed and the hills and the mountains. And I do remember just feeling a very strong connection to the scenery and the nature here. Didn't know I'd end up buying a house here, but that's just the funny way life happens sometimes.
Well, you mentioned that where you are now is the setting of your new novel, Musical Chairs. I'm sure you've got a copy there too. This is the advanced copy that I've got, but
Here's the new hardcover.
the new hardcover coming your way from Interabang Books on July 21st. We'll have a big, nice stack of these books in the store. And I really so much enjoyed this book.
Oh, thank you.
It seemed to me to be the perfect kind of book for what I felt like I was needing right now. It takes place during a summer, and there are some heavy things that are happening to some of the characters. The main character is a woman named Bridget. She's kind of going through, it's kind of cliche, but maybe we could say a middle-age crisis.
Yes, yep, that's fair.
She's just broke up with her boyfriend. She's gone out to stay for the summer at this home outside of the city that she's owned for a while, very close to where her father lives. And she's expecting to have this kind of romantic summer with this new beau of hers. That doesn't happen. And then suddenly her kids descend on her, and her music partner descends on her. And pretty much she pretty soon has a full house, and there's a lot going on. So tell me, tell me what came first? Did the story come first, or did the character of Bridget come first? Because she really feels real and relatable to me.
I would say that the notion of a friendship came first. Bridget and Will came first for me. I wanted to write a story of a male-female friendship that might or might not, I won't give a spoiler, sort of fly in the face of what Harry said. And when Harry met Sally, men and women can't be just friends. And I just wondered if that was something that I could explore. I just liked the idea of sort of exploring this very close male-female friendship that's sort of a marriage-like bond, but they're just friends. And they're colleagues also, they work together. So that was one of the early things that happened. I also liked the idea of exploring this age that I am in myself, where your kids are grown, and I'll use air quotes, because sometimes it seems like it's harder these days for kids to fully get on their feet for a number of reasons that we can talk about another time. But you're still, for moms who are still feeling responsible for their children, and then they still have parents who might need or not need anything. They might be incredibly independent, or in the case of some of my friends, they might need a good deal of care, which is not true in my case. But so I just sort of liked the idea of being in the middle there with the children on one side and the parent on the other side, and just exploring that. And I'd written 2 books that took place in New York City. And because I do spend a lot of time out here, and because I think the idea of a weekend house that is neglected is just a place where a lot of humor can happen. I'm always looking for situations where I can find the humor in it. I think adult children moving back home can be difficult, but I think it's hilarious. I think there's a lot of room for humor in that. Houses that are sort of neglected and falling apart, I think there's a lot of room for humor in that as well. And so it came sort of in different bits and stages. At one point, I was writing about a quartet. And then I decided at some point that a trio was just a much more interesting dynamic. So I cut one member of the ensemble and just went to three people. And
Well, you mentioned that Bridget and Will are colleagues, and so Will is also in they call themselves the Forsyth Trio. Yeah. And these two really do have an incredibly close relationship, even though they kind of come from different backgrounds. We'll talk about it a little bit in more depth, but Bridget has a very renowned musical father, a famous composer. And because of that, she basically is a child of privilege, whereas Will is not. And he's kind of had to be a little more scrappy. But the relationship that they have with one another is incredibly generous, and they have a compatibility, I think, that is really charming in the book. What made you want to kind of focus on music? Do you have a musical background?
I have no musical background whatsoever, actually. I don't play an instrument and I don't read music. I'm an appreciator of classical music. I do like it. But I somehow ended up with 2 of my 3, well, actually all 3 of my children are very musical. 2 of them are pursuing it professionally. One is an engineer. He does music production and engineering, and the other is studying classical music, composition and musicology in college right now. I spent so much of their childhood carting them from lessons and performances, and that just sort of became a big part of my life. My youngest was a true consultant on this book. He really helped me a lot. He went to an arts boarding school and he was in ensembles there. And there was something about the intensity of a music ensemble that I just liked the idea of that for my own narrative purposes. I liked the idea of a situation where you have to work together, listen to each other, trust each other, and where the chemistry in the group is of great importance to the success of the group and to the happiness of the group members as they're working together. So I liked this idea, especially with a trio, of having the chemistry be very, very solid between Will and Bridget. And you're right, I could not ignore the financial disparity between them and what that means in a setting where you're not necessarily going to be making a lot of money. So that was definitely something that I couldn't ignore in the story. But then the fun for me was also having this third empty chair, this other, so the violinist, because Bridget plays cello and Will plays piano, and then they have their violinist who keeps leaving them, and they keep having to replace and have that empty chair that they have to put someone in. And it changes so much who you put in the chair. If it's somebody that melds really well with the group, or who redefines the group in some way, or who really adds something wonderful and new, or who detracts either from the fun or from the spirit of the group, the way they sort of have conceived of it. So that was a lot of fun to think about. I have another friend who's an author, Marsha Butler, who wrote a great book called Pickles Progress. She's a terrific New York City writer. She's actually just moved to New Mexico, so she's no longer a New York City writer. She also wrote a memoir called The Skin Above Our Knees, but she's a professional oboist. So she was also somebody who I called after around my first, I think say after the first draft was pretty well completed. And she called me, we talked on the phone, and she was like, we got to talk about money. We really got to talk about money, because it's got to be, they're not making a lot. And we need, like, there's like how, and what can Will afford and what can he not afford? And how does he feel having this very close friend who is a person of great privilege? So that was something that was interesting and fun. How could I maintain their friendship and not have it filled with bitterness or jealousy or resentment, and yet have them come from very, very different backgrounds and have very different financial circumstances?
Well, it's interesting that you said that your kids are very musical and you are not, because that's kind of the opposite of what is happening in musical chairs. Bridget has two children, they're twins, a boy and a girl, Isabel and Oscar, and I think at one point she and Will are talking, and they agree that like neither of them can carry a tune. They're just very non-musical.
Well, I just find that fascinating. I mean, I look at my kids and I don't get, of course, there's exposure, what are you exposed to? And that's very, very important. But to actually do these things professional, to be a professional musician is different from I didn't, but if one has taken piano lessons for 8 years, and you may develop a certain proficiency, but that doesn't mean that you're going to end up with a life in it. So I just always find that interesting. We lived in Berlin for a few years when my kids were very small. And I spoke a bit of German terribly. I speak terrible German, but I spoke a little bit of German. My kids didn't speak any. So the first several months that we were there, I was helping them with their homework as best I could. And I was the one to speak in restaurants and to talk to the teachers and just do what I could. And then, very swiftly, I might add, my children caught up and surpassed me by a lot. Now their German is fantastic, and mine is worse than it was when we were living there. So there was something so exciting seeing my kids excel at something that I couldn't do myself. Like, I just find that to be a really interesting phenomenon. My mom was a wonderful singer. I can't sing. And I just think that that's so interesting as a parent, either if you have a skill that you somehow did not pass along, or if your children develop skills that you just never had, like, where does that come from? So it was just something fun to explore. And of course, the kids' parentage is a little bit of an issue in the book anyway. So having that be part of what Bridget's thinking about as she's considering, and that's another spoiler that I won't give away, but as she's sort of considering who the father is of her children and what skills he might have had, that just comes into play again.
Well, let's go there just a little bit, and I'll try not to spoil anything for the readers, but I was fascinated with how you came upon this idea that a single woman very intentionally decides that she wants to have a child, and she does all the stuff that she needs to do to, get a donor and be artificially inseminated. But then at the same time, she's kind of having this unanticipated relationship with a man about the same time. And so there's this whole kind of question in her mind over the years, well, was it the donor or was it this one night fling that I had? And I think, I don't know if anyone has really dealt with that issue quite the same way. And I found that intriguing. What made you think about that?
I liked the idea of there being I wanted there to be something that made the stakes very high for both Bridget and for Will with their relationship with their original violinist. They both seemed to have very strong feelings about him, and I wanted those to be grounded in something where the stakes were high and where the reader would look at that and say, okay, I can see why that's going to be problematic, not just for one of them, but for both of them. I'm sorry if I'm talking in code right now, because I'm trying to say enough and not say too much. But the Gavin, who, in my mind sort of looks and sounds a little bit like Jude Law, maybe, an American Jude Law. Is he American? He's British, isn't he?
I think he's British.
But someone who is very insecure, but that insecure is completely masked with a sort of pompous, arrogant attitude. But when you get to know him a little bit, you realize he's not the way he seems. He's actually someone who had so much success so early in life that it shaped his personality to a certain degree. So the question about whether or not Gavin is the right person to bring back to fill that empty chair, I just wanted that to be loaded and complicated. And that was sort of the idea that I came up with. One part of that being that you shouldn't have a relationship with someone in the trio because that's going to mess up the chemistry of the trio. And then the other, just the idea that maybe you did and it was a secret. So it took a lot of different, I wrote a lot of drafts with this book. I went through a lot of different changes with sort of how I wanted to piece that together. There was, of course, the possibility, since she had twins, that she could have ended up with two different fathers. So that was sort of another thing that I was puzzling over. But that seemed like a little bit of a bridge too far. So,
well, the issue with the former third member, Gavin, is even a little bit more complicated when we look at his relationship with Bridget's father. So Bridget's father is this kind of bigger than life guy. Everyone knows him to such an extent that Bridget kind of denies her relationship with him when she's running into people in this little town where her weekend house is and where her father lives.
Because it's such a conversation changer, right? If she says, yes, that's my dad, that's going to take the conversation in a completely different direction, whether she wants it to or not. So sometimes she would just rather not and just not go there.
And he's a kind of imposing, intimidating guy, and extremely opinionated. And he was very clear, I think, to both Bridget and Will that he thought that Gavin was the most talented member of the trio when he was with them.
Yeah.
Did you have someone in mind when you were thinking about Edward? That's Bridget's father, this famous composer.
I just sort of saw him as a Leonard Bernstein kind of character. He's almost 90. He has composed and conducted his entire life. And one of his compositions that he wrote when he was in his 20s ends up being a piece of music that mattered so much to him in the context of when he wrote it, that he has started this summer program where he hosts a number of young composers at his home, where they can be, they can relax, and it's a retreat, and they can write music, and they can talk to him. He's very available to them. So, and he has a softer side. He is definitely, as you said, he loves to make a speech. He's a definite speech maker. So when it was time for me to sort of get his voice into the book, the only way I could think of bringing Edward his own chapter in the book was to have him make a toast. It just seemed like the right thing, which was a lot of fun to write, that toast, by the way. It also went through a lot of revisions, but to get to write a toast from the voice of this 90-year-old man who's had so many just incredible experiences and has met so many people in his life, I had to cut it. He might have spoken for a solid 45 minutes, and I would have loved to have written a 45-minute toast. But of course, for the purposes of fiction, that wouldn't work very well. So I had to keep cutting and cutting. But he is the kind of man who, when he makes a speech, he's quoting off the top of his head. That's a skill that I do not have. Quoting off the top of his head, often speaking in different languages. And he loves to instruct. He loves to entertain. And he loves to have the spotlight on him, for sure. So, and everybody knows this about him. So it's going to impact sort of the way you act. So when Will is in a position to take the spotlight, it just doesn't even feel right if the option is that Edward could take the spotlight, because he's really the one who, it's the natural thing is to have Edward be the one to take the stage, to hold the microphone. That's really where he's most comfortable and happy. Writing his character was great fun. I mean, I enjoyed writing this book anyway. Even when I was writing it, we weren't in the situation that we're in today, but I'm always looking for the humor and for the fun. And now I think, given the circumstance we're in, I think what could be better than fiction to sort of take us out of some of our more stressful moments. And so even with that dynamic between Will and Edward, I never wanted it to be, I'm not good with anxiety-provoking situations. So it's not a book that's going to, the conflict in it is there, but it's not going to make you lose sleep.
No, the dialogue in the book is so funny, and it's light, but it also feels like it has substance. And I read from your website that you have an acting background, and I think you credit that for being what makes you very focused on dialogue in your writing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So I start my writing, when I'm even starting a new book, I start with dialogue. I am most comfortable putting two people, adding a third person. There are scenes in this book where there are dinner parties, and that's a real challenge because I see it in my head as if it's on stage. I see a dinner party scene, and I've got my cast of characters around the table, and it's so easy and fun for me, not easy, but it's fun for me to write a scene like that because you know who's talking, because there is an audience rather than a reader. The challenge for me comes later when you're not in my head. So I have to actually try to make the dialogue jump the way I want it to sound in my head from one person to the next, while still giving you all the clues that you need to know who's talking and what are they doing, and setting the stage, because I've got the stage in my head. I think very theatrically. I love reading plays. You all have a great drama section. I have bought things from your drama section before. Yeah. I love reading plays. I think people who love to read fiction should read more plays. It's great fun. Sometimes there's a show on Broadway that I missed, or I just couldn't pay for the tickets or whatever. Gods of Carnage was one of them. I remember when Gods of Carnage came and I didn't get a chance to see it, so I bought it. You can do all of that in your head. It's just wonderful fun to just read a play. So I recommend that. And I do a lot of that myself, and it's the part of writing that comes the most naturally, I guess, for me. So I do a lot of that, of putting people together, starting a conversation. And then as I get to know the characters better, I can start to figure out how they would react to certain things coming into the conversation that they're engaged in. So yes, I think seeing plays and reading plays helps anyone who's interested in writing. It helps with dialogue because plays are written to be spoken out loud, and fiction is different, but I read all of my scenes out loud. When I wrote the book Limelight, which actually takes place, it's sort of set in the Broadway world, I had my 23-year-old son read all of the scenes with me that the two main characters are, whenever they're engaged in conversation, I would have my son read those scenes with me. It just makes me sure that I've got it right, that they sound like they're truly engaged in a conversation. For me, the challenge is always remembering that these are readers, not audience members, and I have to make sure that I've set the stage for them and that I'm giving them all the clues they need to know who's speaking and to whom. That part is a challenge for me. But I think if any of your viewers read the book, I think they'll see the scenes, and I hope enjoy them and laugh at them, because just imagine that you're watching a play.
No, it's true. There's a scene where Bridget has somewhat of a party at her house and people drink a little too much wine. There's a scene where they're at Edward's for dinner and different people just randomly start showing up unexpectedly and joining the table. The dialogue is really wonderful. And there's a lot of dialogue here about romance that's happening. Unfortunately, not for Bridget, but about midway through the book, I guess we learn that Edward is engaged to be married to a widow that's maybe not quite as old as he is, but still quite
close,
quite old. Will kind of finds a local gal that he becomes romantically interested in. Isabel, the daughter, starts fooling around with the groundskeeper, the yard
handyman.
Handyman, right? And I really thought that it was clever the way that you had these side discussions, for instance, between Bridget and her sister talking about, like, my God, what is Dad doing? Why is he marrying this woman now? And the romances that are happening amongst all these people are kind of like circling around, almost like little cyclones around Bridget, and she's just kind of like forced to sit back and watch all of this kind of going on around her. It was a lot of characters to kind of keep up with and juggle. I was like writing a chart of the characters before we got on today, and I must have like 24 people that are out here like in different spokes of the wheel.
It's a big cast of characters. And I remember when I was reading Anne Patchett's Commonwealth, where she brings two families together, and one family has 4 siblings and the other family has 2 or maybe 3 siblings, and they're the 2 couples, and they split up, and then these 2 get together. And I just got an index card and I wrote the 2 family trees, and I used that as my bookmark because I wanted to know these people, but it took me a few chapters in to remember which person went with what. So I always recommend an index card to keep track of things. It's a very big cast of characters, and a lot of them have a voice in the book. Sorry, I'm so dark now all of a sudden. Is that better? The sun is coming and going here. So, but the way the book is structured, it's structured into 3 months. I'm really sticking with the theme of 3s in this book. There's the month of June, July, and August, but every chapter is written, every set of chapters are written in 3s too. So it's not something that the reader would ever pick up on necessarily, but Bridget always has a chapter, Will has a chapter, and then there's the blank chair of who's going to get that 3rd chapter. Gavin, because he's especially important, has 3 chapters, 1 in each section of the book. And every other time it's someone else. So I needed to make sure that if I was going to have this many characters in the book, that they all really needed to be there, and that you would get to know them, and that you would get to know them well enough that when it's their voice, when they're the ones not narrating, it's not first person, but when they're the ones who are sort of taking a chapter, that you feel close enough to them that you recognize their voice and that it's not somebody else's, you know, that you can tell who it is that's that were in their head for that particular chapter. And then it was just fun. I remember listening to Marcy Dramansky. I love her. She wrote a book called Very Nice that actually just came out in paperback. She's one of my favorite writers. And I went to listen to her one time, and somebody asked her about coincidence. They said, there's a lot of coincidence in your book. And I just remember her talking about how fun coincidence can be in fiction, that this character ends up knowing this other character. And she said, of course, because that's why you brought them into the book. You know, it's coincidence, but it's the world of the novel that she created. And I think about coincidence in writing, and when is it fun to have a moment of coincidence? When are you pushing it? Like when are you going too far? So I wanted all of these characters to play a role, to have a reason for being there, to have a reason to need to speak, to need to have a role in the book, and not to have it become way too much of a coincidence when you find out how different people are connected. But what you described earlier, you know, Edward talks about it in the toast with everyone as a dance. He describes it, what you described as sort of little cyclones. He sees it, you know, as one of those formal British dances where everyone is there and there are couples, and then they sort of twirl and rearrange, and then they have to find some new constellation. And that's really what happens with this cast of characters over and over again in the book. They rearrange themselves and then come back together in some new form. And I think part of life is knowing that this happens and embracing it rather than being terrified of it, because change is inevitable, and our families change and our friendships change, and sometimes they can just rearrange themselves, and it all works out in a lovely dance.
You, I think you mentioned early on that you have one sister, two sisters? Two. And Bridget has a sister in the book, Gwen, that plays a pretty good role. I would have to think that a lot of that relationship in the book, Bridget and Gwen, is kind of keyed off of some of the things that, or some of the feelings or kind of types of back and forth that you've had with your sisters.
Well, I'm very close to both of my sisters. We're spread across the country. We couldn't be much further: California, Texas, and New York. But we're very, very close. And I can, if I haven't I talk to them all the time, but if I were ever to go a stretch of time and not talk to them, we can pick up the phone and just pick that right up where we left off. You know, I love sisterhood. I love that relationship. I know that it exists, that there are siblings who become estranged or who have problems. I like to explore the side of siblinghood, and with Oscar and Isabel as well, the twins in the book, that maybe there could be differences or different ways that you live your life, or different ways that you raise your children, or different ways that you think about things politically or however, but that there's something so strong in that sibling bond. It's been so special to me in my life. And so I definitely enjoy writing about a nice sisterhood, a nice pair. There's conflict in the book. But every one of these characters, I think they have good intentions, all of them. I think they're all good people at heart. They might be imperfect, and they might make a lot of mistakes, that's for sure. We all do. But I think everyone's heart is in the right place in the book, even when they step on each other's toes or say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. In the case of Bridget and Will, they have some conflict that they need to work out. But everybody comes from a place of trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Stepping back just a little bit, this is kind of a well, not kind of, it is a very weird time to have a new book coming out. And of course, for your previous two novels, the world was different. Authors were flying around on book tours and able to kind of talk to readers face to face. Have you found this incredibly challenging in terms of trying to build up to the release of this book, your third?
It's definitely been a challenge. It's just so disappointing to know that I can't meet readers and talk to them and just have that in-person connection with readers. So that part for me is hard. What's been reinforcing for me is how much fiction has saved me over the last few months. Even when I can't focus, I have been reading more than ever. And I think a lot of the people that I've talked to have been finding that fiction is just such a much needed, and not just fiction, memoirs. I've read 2 memoirs recently that I just read, Wild Game by Adrienne Brodeur. Amazing memoir. I just loved it. And that particular memoir took me to Cape Cod and the beaches and her interesting family and the food that they ate. And every minute that I spend with a book like that, I'm happy and I'm distracted, and I feel like I'm bettering myself because I'm hearing about someone else's story, somebody else's experience. So that for me has made me say, my book tour might be canceled. Fiction is not canceled. Books are not canceled. Bookstores are doing what they can to keep books in the hands of readers, for which I'm so grateful. So I feel good about my profession right now because I feel like it's playing such an important role. And I think that people will find it to be very therapeutic to sit down, think about what mood you're in. Do you want a thriller so that you can think about somebody else's stress and let your own go? Or do you definitely not want any stress at all? In which case, maybe you're looking for a romance, or maybe you're looking for a memoir or just something to sort of keep you busy. But I won't deny that the disappointment of not being able to travel and really talk to people in person about the book is sad. I'm happy that we have this instead. I'm happy that we've got Zoom. Everyone's embracing video conferencing and video chats and all of that. I came up with another idea since I'm here in Connecticut where the book takes place, and since my adult children ended up all moving in with me, which was just life imitating art. I did not ever think I would end up spending 3 months with all 3 of my kids under the same roof again. I decided to make a book trailer, and your viewers can find it on YouTube. If you just go to YouTube and you put in the search window, musical chairs, Poeppel, Amy Poeppel, you'll find it, or it's on my website if you want to find it there. It's a comedic it's 90 seconds, but it was just a way for me to show people something about me. It's a little bit, it talks about whether or not this book has autobiographical elements to it, but to talk a little bit about the book, a little bit about me, a little bit to show Litchfield County and this place where I've been the last few months. And it just made me feel like I was doing something to kind of communicate to readers out there. But it's a tough time. And so I've talked to a lot of people who say, I can't read right now. It's too hard for me to read right now. I'm too stressed. I'm too unfocused. And I understand completely. I'm a huge fan of audiobooks. I find taking a walk with an audiobook, I'm listening to Michelle Obama right now, Becoming, and just taking a walk with that and hearing her voice, I just feel like I'm in another world when I am doing that. So I try audiobooks if you can't focus, and just try to dive into somebody else's story.
What do you think is a favorite fiction recommendation of what you've been reading so far this year?
Oh my gosh. Okay, I think one of the top books I've read just in the past few months is Jesmyn Ward's Sing Unburied Sing. I loved her first book. I adored Salvage the Bones. It was just one of those books that stuck with me. And I went in, excited to read this one as well. I'm sorry if I'm right under, is that better? I went into it knowing that I love her writing. I think she's just a brilliant writer. And I ended up liking Sing Unburied Sing even more than Salvage the Bones. It's just a beautiful book. The relationship between the main character, Jojo, and his baby sister is something I will never, speaking of sibling bonds, I will never forget the way this little boy treats his little sister and the love between them. It's just an amazing novel. One of the most surprising books I read recently was American Spy by Lauren
Oh,
Wilkinson.
yeah.
Just came like I don't know what I expected going in. I guess I expected a spy story, and it is a spy story, but it's also just this touching letter from a woman to her children, and she's sort of explaining events that have happened. So it's the language in it is unexpected because it's in the form of writing to children. She doesn't expect them to read it right away, but they're babies right now, or young children right now. So the voice of the narrator is amazing. I just really enjoyed that one. I can keep going forever, so you have to stop me.
I have one for you.
Yes.
Since you are a master of dialogue, have you ever read Ivy Compton Burnett?
I haven't.
So she's an older 19th century, I think late 19th century British writer, but she does this kind of like Downton Abbey or upstairs downstairs thing, and it's all in dialogue. The novel is 100% dialogue.
Oh,
and
how fun.
it's very, very funny. It's that kind of old fashioned, really cutting, biting British humor. But I think you would like that just because it's very unique. I've never seen a book that, it really must be 95% dialogue. It almost reads.
Ivy Compton Burnett. And which one should I start with? Or is there one in particular?
I would start with Maid and Manservant.
Maid and Manservant. Okay. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. Let me know if you do. Well, thank you, Amy. This was so nice.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me in my house. And I love seeing a little bit of Dallas always. I can't believe I don't know when I'm coming back. I want to come and have dinner at Mazzaro and have a margarita and just visit my dad and be back. But I don't know. I don't know when that's going to happen. We all have to be patient these days.
Well, we'll be waiting for you. And in the meantime, I really look forward to putting your book into readers' hands. I think it's the perfect summer read, and I think people are going to enjoy it. Good luck to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and hi to all of your viewers.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.